That's not what we agreed on. Alden Whitmore's voice cut through the conference room like a knife through silk. I froze mid-sentence, my laser pointer still aimed at the projection screen where my carefully crafted slides glowed. The three clients from Paramount Industries sat straighter in their chairs, their expressions shifting from interested to confused. Alden leaned back, arms crossed, shaking his head with practiced disappointment. Eleanor, I specifically told you we'd focus on cost reduction, not expansion strategies. The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. My heart slammed against my ribs, but I kept my face neutral. I had spent 3 weeks on this presentation, working late into countless nights, perfecting every detail. The emails confirming our strategy sat in my inbox, time-stamped and clear. He had approved every single slide just yesterday morning. Now he sat there, rewriting history in real time, and I watched my credibility crumble with each passing second. The clients exchanged glances. Whitmore smiled at them, apologetic and smooth. I apologized for the confusion. Sometimes wires get crossed. My throat tightened, but I refused to let my voice shake. Heat flooded my face as the silence stretched. Mr. Harrison from Paramount cleared his throat uncomfortably, glancing between Whitmore and me. I could feel the humiliation spreading through my chest like spilled ink on paper. My hands trembled slightly as I lowered the laser pointer. This wasn't just embarrassing. This was calculated. Whitmore had done this before, small comments that made me second-guess myself, subtle corrections that implied I hadn't been listening. But never this publicly, never this brazenly. My mind raced through the morning's events. The email he'd sent at 7, praising the presentation's focus on expansion opportunities. His cheerful wave as I'd entered the office, telling me the clients would love what I'd prepared. None of this was accidental. He wanted me to look incompetent, unprepared, unreliable. The question was why. I forced myself to breathe slowly, evenly. Getting defensive would only make things worse. Arguing would paint me as difficult, unprofessional. The clients didn't know me well enough to know the truth. They only saw a junior consultant contradicting her boss. My name is Eleanor Bradley, and I'm 32 years old. I've worked at Whitmore Consulting for 4 years, climbing from research analyst to senior consultant through sheer determination and countless overtime hours. I specialized in operational efficiency for mid-sized manufacturing companies, turning struggling operations into profit centers. My track record spoke for itself: 15 successful projects, 12 client renewals, 3 industry awards. Alden Whitmore hired me personally, impressed by my graduate thesis on supply chain optimization. For the first 2 years, he'd been supportive, mentoring me through complex negotiations, trusting me with increasingly important clients. Then something shifted 6 months ago when the firm started discussing partnership tracks. Suddenly my ideas were questioned, my reports required excessive revisions, my client interactions were monitored more closely. I'd attributed it to standard scrutiny before promotion decisions. Now, standing in this conference room with my professional reputation under attack, I understood differently. Whitmore felt threatened. A younger consultant earning partnership would dilute his control, his commission structure, his dominance. So he decided to undermine me systematically, publicly, where it would hurt most. The presentation had consumed my life for 3 weeks. I'd started with preliminary research, analyzing Paramount Industries' financials, interviewing their department heads, mapping their production workflows. Late nights at the office became routine. I'd arrive home after midnight, eat cold takeout, collapse into bed, then wake at 6 to review notes before morning meetings. The data told a clear story. Paramount was operationally sound but growth limited. They'd maximized efficiency in their current facilities. The path forward required expansion into adjacent markets, leveraging their strong reputation and existing client relationships. I drafted the strategy, sent it to Whitmore for approval. He'd responded enthusiastically within hours. Brilliant analysis, Eleanor. This is exactly what they need to hear. Focus on the expansion framework. Show them the revenue projections. His email sat in my inbox, time-stamped, explicit, undeniable. I'd built the entire presentation around those instructions, refining every slide until it gleamed. Yesterday morning, he'd reviewed the final version in his office, nodding approvingly. Paramount will eat this up. You've nailed it. 24 hours later, he was claiming we'd agreed on something completely different. Whitmore's smirk was subtle, barely visible, but I caught it. That tiny upturn at the corner of his mouth as he watched me struggle to respond. He was enjoying this. The realization sent cold fury through my veins. Mr. Harrison shifted uncomfortably. His colleague, Miss Patterson, frowned at her notes. The third client, Mr. Kovacs, simply looked confused. None of them knew what to believe. I could see their trust evaporating, their confidence in Whitmore Consulting wavering. This presentation was supposed to secure a 3-year contract extension worth $700,000. Now it was falling apart because my boss had decided to gaslight me in front of our clients. I had 2 choices. Contradict him directly, risk appearing defensive and unprofessional, or absorb the humiliation and salvage what remained of the meeting. Neither option was good. But standing here arguing would only make things worse. The clients didn't care about our internal communications. They wanted competence, confidence, reliability. Right now, I was demonstrating none of those qualities. I needed to regroup, find solid ground, come back stronger. I clicked to the next slide, forcing my voice steady. You're absolutely right, Mr. Whitmore. Let me adjust the focus. The lie tasted bitter, but I swallowed it. I pivoted quickly, improvising a discussion about operational cost analysis, pulling from backup slides I prepared for potential questions. My hand stopped shaking as muscle memory took over. Years of client presentations had trained me to think quickly, adapt to changing circumstances, maintain professionalism under pressure. I walked them through efficiency metrics, highlighting areas where Paramount excelled and identifying minor optimization opportunities. It wasn't the presentation they'd come to see. It wasn't the strategy I'd meticulously crafted. But it was competent, professional, safe. Mr. Harrison's expression relaxed slightly. Miss Patterson took notes. Mr. Kovacs nodded along, though his earlier enthusiasm had vanished. Whitmore watched me closely, arms still crossed, expression unreadable. I couldn't tell if he was satisfied with my recovery or disappointed I hadn't fallen apart completely. The presentation limped to its conclusion, a shadow of what it should have been. Thank you all for your time. I closed my laptop smoothly, maintaining eye contact with each client. I'll send revised materials reflecting today's discussion by end of week. My voice betrayed nothing, no frustration, no anger, no hint of the storm raging inside me. Mr. Harrison stood, extending his hand. We appreciate the thorough analysis, Ms. Bradley. His tone was polite but cooler than when we'd started. The warmth from our preliminary meetings had evaporated. Miss Patterson nodded briefly, already checking her phone. Mr. Kovacs seemed eager to leave. Whitmore walked them to the elevator, all charm and reassurance, smoothing over the awkwardness I'd supposedly created. I gathered my materials methodically, my movements precise and controlled. The conference room felt suffocating, the walls pressing in. But I refused to rush, refused to show weakness. I packed my laptop, collected my notes, straightened the chairs. Only when the elevator doors closed behind our clients did I allow my shoulders to drop slightly. I stood alone in the glass-walled conference room, watching Whitmore return down the hallway, that satisfied smirk firmly in place now. My office was a sanctuary, a small glass-enclosed space with a door I could actually close. I shut it firmly, dropped into my chair, and let my head fall into my hands. My heart still pounded, adrenaline coursing through my system with nowhere to go. The humiliation felt physical, a weight pressing down on my chest. But beneath the shame, anger burned hot and bright. Whitmore had blindsided me deliberately, strategically, cruelly. This wasn't about a miscommunication or honest disagreement. This was sabotage. I forced myself to breathe slowly, counting each inhale and exhale. Panic wouldn't help. Emotion wouldn't help. I needed to think clearly, strategically, several steps ahead. What was his endgame? If I couldn't recover from today's disaster, the Paramount contract would collapse. Whitmore could blame me for losing a major client, provide documented evidence of my failure, use it to block my partnership consideration. Meanwhile, he'd swoop in to salvage the relationship, positioning himself as the experienced hand cleaning up a junior consultant's mess. It was elegant in its cruelty. And if I hadn't kept meticulous records, it might have worked. I opened my email archive, searching for the thread with Whitmore. There, timestamped 3 weeks ago, was my initial strategy summary. Subject line, Paramount Industries, proposed approach. I'd outlined the expansion framework clearly, explicitly. His response, received within 2 hours, Eleanor, this is exactly the direction we need. Proceed with full presentation development. Excellent instincts. I screenshot the exchange, saving it to a dedicated folder. The next email, sent 2 weeks ago, contained my preliminary slide deck. Whitmore's feedback, strong work. Expand the market analysis section. Clients will want detailed projections. Another screenshot. Then last week's draft review, where he'd suggested specific phrasing changes, all focused on strengthening the expansion narrative. Screenshot. And finally, yesterday morning's approval. Presentation looks outstanding. Paramount will be impressed. You've captured exactly what they need to hear. The evidence was irrefutable, undeniable, crystal clear. Every email confirmed we'd agreed on expansion strategy. Every communication supported my version of events. Whitmore had either forgotten about this paper trail, or more likely, he'd assumed I wouldn't fight back. He'd underestimated me. I created a new document, professional and precise. At the top, I typed Paramount Industries presentation, documentation of approved strategy. Below that, I inserted each email chronologically with timestamps clearly visible. I added context notes explaining how each communication had shaped the presentation development. Then I included the slide deck itself with metadata showing creation dates and revision history. Everything was there, a complete timeline proving exactly what had been discussed, approved, and delivered. The file was clinical, factual, unemotional. No accusations, no angry commentary, just documentation. I titled it neutrally, saved it in multiple locations, backed it up to cloud storage. This wasn't about revenge or drama. This was about protecting my professional reputation with verifiable evidence. I printed a physical copy as well, organizing it in a clean presentation folder. If Whitmore wanted to rewrite history, he'd have to explain away his own written words. I sat back, studying the compiled evidence with grim satisfaction. The anger had cooled into something harder, more focused. I wasn't going to let him destroy what I'd built. Not without a fight. A soft knock interrupted my concentration. Marcus Choan, another senior consultant, peered through my office glass. I waved him in, grateful for the interruption. Marcus had joined the firm a year after me, working primarily on financial restructuring projects. We'd collaborated on several assignments, developing mutual respect and careful friendship. That meeting looked rough, he said quietly, closing the door behind him. I saw the clients leaving early. Whitmore seemed pleased with himself. I studied Marcus carefully, weighing how much to share. Office politics were treacherous, alliances shifted, and casual conversations could become ammunition. But Marcus had mentioned his own frustrations with Whitmore's management style, subtle comments about favoritism and credit stealing. He contradicted everything we'd agreed on, I said finally, in front of the clients. Made me look incompetent. Marcus winced. He's done that before. Last year, he rewrote my entire proposal after telling the client it was inadequate, then took credit for the revised version. The confirmation was oddly comforting. This wasn't personal. Whitmore operated this way systematically, undermining consultants who threatened his position. What did you do? I asked. Marcus shrugged. Nothing. I didn't have proof. Just his word against mine. He paused, then added carefully, but you keep excellent records, don't you? I spent the rest of the afternoon planning my next move carefully. Confronting Whitmore directly would be pointless. He'd deny everything, claim I'd misunderstood, suggest I was being oversensitive or defensive. Going to HR without client witness would result in a classic he said she said situation, likely resolved in favor of the senior partner. No, I needed to present the evidence in front of the clients themselves. Let them see the documentation, draw their own conclusions, make their own judgments. But timing was critical. I couldn't appear vindictive or emotional. I needed to frame this as clarifying a misunderstanding, providing additional context, ensuring client confidence in our strategy. The follow-up meeting was scheduled for next week, a routine check-in to address any questions. Perfect. I'd prepare a modified presentation that incorporated both approaches, expansion and cost reduction, showing how they complemented rather than contradicted each other. And I'd bring the documentation casually as reference materials, just in case anyone needed to review our earlier discussions. Professional, helpful, thorough, nothing accusatory, just comprehensive. I emailed Mr. Harrison directly, copying Whitmore per standard protocol. Following up on today's presentation, I'd like to schedule additional time next week to address the strategic direction discussion. I've prepared supplementary materials that clarify both operational efficiency and growth expansion frameworks. Would Tuesday afternoon work for your team? The message was polite, professional, solution-oriented. It suggested I was being proactive rather than defensive. Mr. Harrison responded within an hour. Tuesday at 2 works. We'd appreciate the clarification. Today's meeting raised some questions we'd like to resolve before moving forward with contract renewal. The response was measured but revealed their uncertainty. Today's disaster had shaken their confidence. They needed reassurance that Whitmore Consulting knew what it was doing. Whitmore replied shortly after, copying me, "I'll be out of town Tuesday, but Eleanor can handle the follow-up discussion." His message carried a dismissive edge, as if he'd already written off my ability to salvage the situation. Or perhaps he simply didn't want to be present when I potentially exposed his manipulation. Either way, his absence would work in my favor. The clients would see the evidence without his interference or attempts to control the narrative. Monday morning arrived with an unexpected complication. Whitmore appeared at my office door, coffee in hand, expression falsely sympathetic. "Eleanor, about last week's meeting. I've been thinking about how we might salvage the Paramount relationship." I kept my face neutral, waiting. "I'm concerned your presentation approach confused the clients. They expected operational focus, got expansion strategy instead. Creates credibility issues." His version of events, stated as objective fact. So I've drafted a revised proposal emphasizing cost reduction. I'll present it to Paramount this week, get things back on track. He was trying to take over completely, removing me from client contact, positioning himself as the solution to a problem I'd created. If he controlled the narrative, my evidence wouldn't matter. "Actually," I said carefully, "I've already scheduled a follow-up for tomorrow." Mr. Harrison requested clarification on strategic direction. I've prepared comprehensive materials addressing both approaches. Whitmore's expression tightened slightly. "I don't think that's wise. You might confuse them further." "They specifically requested the meeting," I replied, keeping my tone professional. "I'll keep you informed of outcomes." His jaw clenched briefly before he recovered his smooth demeanor. "Well, try not to make things worse." The threat was subtle but clear. Tuesday afternoon, I arrived at Paramount's offices 30 minutes early. The extra time allowed me to set up properly, organizing materials with deliberate care. The conference room was smaller than Whitmore's glass palace, more intimate, better for what I needed to accomplish. I arranged the evidence folder to my left, within easy reach but not prominently displayed. My laptop held the new presentation, which genuinely incorporated both strategic approaches. This wasn't about confrontation. It was about truth, documented and undeniable. Mr. Harrison, Ms. Patterson, and Mr. Kovacs arrived together, their expressions cautious but professional. "Thank you for making time," I said, greeting each with a firm handshake. I wanted to address last week's discussion and provide clarity on our strategic recommendations. They settled into chairs, notebooks ready, guards visibly up. They'd been burned by the previous meeting's confusion. They wanted reassurance that their consultant actually knew what she was doing. "Before we begin," I said calmly, "I want to acknowledge that last week's presentation created some uncertainty about our recommended direction." Direct acknowledgement, no excuses. Their posture relaxed slightly. I opened the new presentation smoothly. Today I'll walk through both operational efficiency and expansion strategies, showing how they work together rather than competing. The slides were crisp, professional, comprehensive. I explained how cost reduction in current operations would fund expansion into new markets, creating a phased approach that minimized risk while maximizing growth potential. Mr. Harrison leaned forward, interested. Miss Patterson took detailed notes. Mr. Kovacs nodded along, his earlier confusion replaced by engagement. This was the presentation they'd deserved originally, strategic and nuanced. Halfway through, I paused. I want to reference our earlier planning discussions to show how this integrated approach developed. I reached for the evidence folder, my movement casual, unhurried. These are the emails and drafts from the past 3 weeks documenting our strategy development process. I placed the folder on the table, open but not pushed forward. Let them come to it naturally, curiously. Mr. Harrison glanced down, then did a double take. The top page showed Whitmore's email from 3 weeks ago, praising the expansion framework. His expression shifted, recognition dawning. Miss Patterson leaned over to read, her eyes widening slightly. Silence filled the room as they reviewed the documentation. I said nothing, letting the evidence speak for itself. Page after page showed Whitmore's explicit approval of expansion strategy, his enthusiastic support, his detailed feedback, all contradicting last week's public repudiation. Mr. Kovacs flipped through the emails methodically, his frown deepening. These communications clearly indicate expansion was the agreed approach. His tone was careful, professional, but I heard the question beneath. Why had Whitmore claimed otherwise? Yes, I replied simply. The strategy we discussed last week was developed according to those guidelines. I didn't elaborate, didn't accuse, didn't need to. The documentation was damning enough. Mr. Harrison sat back, his expression thoughtful and troubled. Ms. Bradley, was last week's meeting the first time Mr. Whitmore expressed concerns about expansion focus? The question was loaded, asking what he suspected but couldn't quite believe. Yes, I answered honestly. His feedback during development was consistently supportive of the expansion framework. Another weighted silence. Miss Patterson exchanged a long look with Mr. Harrison. Some unspoken communication passed between them, a shared understanding of what had actually happened last week. Walk us through the timeline, Mr. Harrison said finally. Show us how this strategy developed, using these communications as reference. It wasn't about the strategy anymore. They understood the integrated approach made sense. This was about understanding what had happened in that conference room, why their consultant had been publicly contradicted by her own boss. I walked them through each email chronologically, explaining how each piece of feedback had shaped the presentation. My tone remained professional, factual, never accusatory. I simply presented the evidence and let them draw conclusions. The timestamps were crucial, showing Whitmore's approval just 24 hours before the disastrous meeting. By the time I finished, the room felt different. The client's earlier wariness had transformed into something else, a mixture of understanding and quiet outrage on my behalf. This is extremely concerning, Mr. Harrison said carefully. We selected Whitmore Consulting based on reputation for professionalism and clear communication. Last week's meeting suggested significant internal dysfunction. Ms. Patterson nodded. If we can't trust consistent strategic direction, we can't commit to a long-term partnership. The contract was balanced on a knife's edge now, threatened not by my competence but by Whitmore's manipulation. My phone buzzed insistently in my pocket. Whitmore, no doubt. I'd sent him a courtesy email before the meeting, professional notification that I was providing clarifying materials to the clients. He'd probably expected me to fail, to fumble, to make things worse. Instead, I'd systematically exposed his gaslighting with his own written words. The phone kept buzzing. I ignored it, focusing on the clients. I understand your concerns, I said calmly. My commitment is to providing you with honest, consistent strategic guidance backed by thorough analysis. The documentation demonstrates that commitment. Mr. Harrison studied me carefully. Ms. Bradley, we've worked with several consultants over the years. You've impressed us with your diligence and insight. Last week's confusion was clearly not your fault. The validation felt like cool water after days in the desert. But I kept my expression neutral, professional. This wasn't about vindication. This was about salvaging the client relationship and protecting my career. What we need to understand, Ms. Patterson interjected, is how Whitmore Consulting will ensure this type of miscommunication doesn't happen again. The question wasn't really about process improvement. It was about whether they could trust the firm at all. That's a fair question, I replied carefully. The documentation process I've demonstrated here, maintaining clear records of strategic discussions and approvals, represents my standard practice. It ensures accountability and consistency. I paused, choosing words carefully. However, I can only speak to my own professional standards. Broader firm practices would need to be addressed at a leadership level. The implication was clear without being explicit. My practices were solid. Whitmore's were questionable. Mr. Kovacs spoke for the first time since reviewing the evidence. Would you be comfortable serving as primary consultant on our account going forward? With appropriate oversight, of course, but as the main strategic contact. The question was loaded with meaning. They trusted me, not Whitmore. They wanted to work with me directly, minimizing his involvement. It was an extraordinary vote of confidence and a potential minefield. Agreeing might be seen as undermining my boss. Declining might lose the client entirely. I would be honored to serve as your primary consultant, I said finally, with the understanding that I'd maintain the documentation and communication standards we've discussed today. Professional, confident, clear. Mr. Harrison nodded slowly. We'll need to discuss this arrangement with Mr. Whitmore before finalizing contract renewal. The meeting concluded with handshakes that felt genuinely warm. Mr. Harrison smiled for the first time since arriving. Thank you for the clarity, Ms. Bradley. This is the level of professionalism we expected from Whitmore Consulting. Ms. Patterson added, the integrated strategy makes excellent sense. We're looking forward to implementation, assuming we can resolve the oversight concerns. Mr. Kovacs simply nodded, but his earlier confusion had transformed into respect. They understood what had happened, who was responsible, and who deserved their trust. As they left, Mr. Harrison turned back. We'll be in touch soon. Please keep those communication records accessible. We may need them for our internal discussions. The message was clear. They were going to confront Whitmore about last week's disaster, armed with evidence I'd provided. I packed my materials slowly, allowing myself a moment to process what had just happened. The gamble had worked. The clients saw the truth, acknowledged the manipulation, and shifted their trust accordingly. My phone had accumulated 6 missed calls and 3 increasingly urgent text messages from Whitmore. I ignored them, focusing on organizing my notes and ensuring all evidence was properly filed. By the time I returned to the office, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably. Colleagues gave me odd looks, some curious, some concerned. Marcus appeared at my door immediately. Whitmore's been looking for you. He seems agitated. I smiled slightly. I imagine he is. Within 10 minutes, Whitmore appeared, his usual smooth demeanor cracked around the edges. My office. Now. I followed calmly, carrying my laptop and documentation folder. His office was larger than mine, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, expensive furniture meant to impress clients. He closed the door firmly, a muscle twitching in his jaw. I just received a very interesting call from Paramount Industries. They're questioning my professional judgment. Care to explain? His tone was dangerous, barely controlled fury beneath forced calm. I provided them with documentation of our strategy development process. I replied evenly. They requested clarification on last week's confusion. I showed them the emails confirming our agreed approach. His face flushed. You went behind my back, made me look incompetent to the clients. The irony was almost funny. I provided factual documentation at the client's request. The same documentation you produced during strategy development. Whitmore's control slipped further. You deliberately undermined me. That's insubordination, grounds for termination. I remained calm, my voice steady. I documented our strategic discussions and shared them when clients questioned our direction. That's standard professional practice. I placed the folder on his desk. Every email, every approval, every piece of feedback is here. Time-stamped and verifiable. He stared at the evidence, realizing the trap had closed completely. If he terminated me now, I had documentation proving retaliation. If he claimed I'd misrepresented our agreements, the emails contradicted him. If he tried to salvage his reputation, he'd have to explain why he'd publicly contradicted his own written approvals. The clients want me as primary consultant, I continued. They've expressed concerns about communication consistency. They're willing to renew the contract if I'm the main point of contact. His jaw clenched. That's my client relationship. I corrected gently. Until you chose to gaslight me in front of them. Now they trust me more than you. The power dynamic had completely inverted. He knew it. I knew it. The question was what he'd do about it. The next week brought substantial changes. Paramount Industries renewed their contract with explicit stipulation that I serve as lead consultant. Whitmore retained nominal oversight but was effectively sidelined from day-to-day client contact. Other consultants heard about the situation through office gossip. Several approached me quietly, sharing their own experiences of Whitmore's credit stealing and manipulation. A pattern emerged, documented by multiple people, all painting the same picture of systematic undermining. Within 2 months, the firm's managing partners conducted a formal review of Whitmore's client relationships. My documentation, combined with similar evidence from other consultants, revealed a troubling pattern. Whitmore was quietly reassigned to business development, removed from active client management. I was promoted to senior partner, the youngest in firm history. The promotion came with the expansion portfolio I'd originally proposed for Paramount, now applied across multiple client accounts. My office moved to the corner suite, floor-to-ceiling windows, and all. Marcus was promoted alongside me, both of us benefiting from the leadership vacuum Whitmore's reassignment created. But the real victory wasn't the promotion or the office. It was the respect, the acknowledgement that competence and integrity mattered more than seniority or manipulation. 6 months later, I stood in the same conference room where Whitmore had tried to destroy my credibility. This time, I was presenting to new clients, my reputation preceding me. Word had spread through industry networks about the consultant who'd documented her way out of gaslighting, who'd protected her professional integrity with meticulous records. Young professionals reached out regularly, asking advice about handling difficult bosses, protecting their work, maintaining documentation standards. I'd become an accidental mentor, teaching others the lesson I'd learned the hard way. Intelligence and preparation always outmaneuvered arrogance and deceit. The key was staying calm under pressure, thinking strategically rather than emotionally, and maintaining evidence of every important interaction. Whitmore eventually left the firm, unable to recover his reputation. I heard he'd started an independent consultancy, though clients were skeptical given the whisper network about his practices. Meanwhile, my client portfolio expanded steadily, built on trust, documentation, and consistent delivery. The framed email on my office wall served as a daily reminder, Whitmore's enthusiastic approval of the expansion strategy he'd later tried to deny. Not as a trophy, but as a lesson. Words matter. Documentation matters. Truth, properly preserved, always surfaces eventually. And sometimes the best revenge is simply being undeniably, verifiably, professionally right.